The Adelanys mansion glittered under the Lagos night sky, its chandeliers casting golden light onto polished marble floors as the sounds of laughter and Afrobeats pulsed through the halls. Outside, luxury cars lined the driveway, and inside, a crowd of teenagers dressed in designer brands milled about, sipping mocktails and snapping selfies. It was Marcy Adelan's 17th birthday, celebration of status as much as age. The air smelled of money and imported perfume, and every detail, from the towering cake to the ice sculptures, screamed affluence. In the kitchen, away from the flashing cameras and chatter, Adora carefully balanced a tray of drinks. At 20, she moved quietly, trying not to draw attention. Her soft-spoken voice and thick Igbo accent made her an easy target in this world of polished English and perfect posture. As she stepped into the living room with the tray, the laughter shifted. Marcy's friends locked eyes on her like lions spotting prey. Say, Astra's cattle. Again, one girl smirked. Or is it Astra's boat too? Another chimed in, giggling. Adora's face flushed. She tried to smile, to pretend it didn't sting, but her hands trembled slightly as she handed out the drinks. Marcy, standing by the speaker with her phone up, laughed along with them. "Guys, watch this," she said, recording a video of Adora walking past. She added a caption on Snapchat, "Our maid's English is fighting for its life," before posting it to her story. The others howled. Adora paused for a second. Her eyes darted to Marcy, then to the others. Her throat tightened and her lips quivered, but she said nothing. She lowered her gaze and turned back toward the kitchen. Behind her, the laughter continued like knives in the air. From across the room, Mrs. Adelan stood with a glass of wine in hand, watching the scene unfold. She said nothing to stop it. Later, as Adora passed her quietly, she murmured without looking up from her phone, "Just laugh it off, dear. It's a joke." That night, long after the last car had left and the glitter was swept from the floor, Adora sat alone on her narrow mattress in the servant quarters. The room was dimly lit, her uniform still folded neatly on the chair. She held a dog-eared English book in her lap, her fingers tracing the page. She whispered the words aloud to herself, "Glass, bottle, thank you, sorry." Her voice cracked, but she kept going, again and again. Outside, the mansion slept peacefully. Inside her heart, a quiet ache burned, not just from the cruelty, but from the fight to believe that one day her voice would be heard, and it would matter. Adora had been invisible long before she entered the gilded world of the Adelanys. Orphaned at 12, she was raised by her grandmother in a quiet village in Anambra, where evenings were filled with the rustle of palm trees and the hum of old transistor radios. She had always loved words, collected them like treasures, writing poems in the margins of old notebooks and reading anything she could get her hands on. Her dream had been simple yet impossible, to become a journalist, to tell stories that mattered. But dreams were expensive, and money was a language her family didn't speak. At 18, she left for Lagos, not to chase ambition, but to survive. The job with the Adelanys came through a church connection. A good family, they said, just keep your head down. And so she did. In the mansion, nestled in wealthy Ikoyi, Adora became part of the background, a moving shadow in starched uniforms. Mr. Adelan, a former senator, was a man carved from cold stone, rarely home, but always exuding the aura of power. Image was everything to him. His wife, Florence, was his mirror, owner of a successful fashion brand, always poised, always calculating, more concerned with press appearances than people. Marcy, their daughter, was the crown jewel of their curated, life-spoiled, arrogant, but hollow underneath. With them, Adora was not so much seen as tolerated, summoned only to serve and dismissed just as quickly. When she did speak, her thick Igbo accent made them flinch or smirk. They didn't hear the intelligence in her voice, only the difference. But Adora had carved out a quiet world of her own. In the tiny room at the back of the compound, she devoured the yellowing novels stacked in the dusty guest house library. Dickens, Achebe, Adichie. Each night, she tuned the old radio Uncle Mike had repaired for her and listened to the BBC, mimicking the rhythm of words, practicing how to sound like she belonged in the world she dreamed of. Her accent never quite bent the way she wanted, but her understanding deepened with each broadcast. She spoke little, but she watched everything the way Mrs. Adelin's smile never reached her eyes, the way Mr. Adelin checked his reflection more often than he checked on his daughter, the way Marcy clung to popularity like it was life support. Adora saw it all, storing details like a reporter filing notes. No one noticed the quiet girl with the mop and tray, but Adora noticed everything. Her only real ally was Uncle Mike, the family's old driver. With graying hair and a voice like warm charcoal, he'd been with the family for decades. Unlike the others, he saw her. When he found her reading during her breaks, he never scolded, he smiled. "Keep reading, Ada," he'd say with gentle pride. "One day, they'll listen when you speak." His words became her anchor. In a house full of polished surfaces and sharp tongues, his kindness gave her just enough courage to keep dreaming, to keep believing that her story wasn't over, that one day she'd tell it herself. It started as a whisper in her mind, a quiet rebellion pressed between chores and whispered vocabulary practice. Adora had come across the announcement by chance, an essay competition hosted by a prominent Lagos radio station, inviting young Nigerians to write about the theme, the voice they never hear. The irony struck deep. One late night, after everyone had gone to bed, she scribbled her thoughts by torchlight. She poured everything into the page, the weight of invisibility, the sting of being mocked for her accent, the quiet strength it took to keep dreaming. She signed it simply, A. Obi, shielding her identity with initials and the name of a long-departed father. She didn't expect anything. She just needed to say it, even if no one listened. Weeks passed, and life continued. Trays served, insults endured, books devoured in shadows. Then one evening, as she cleared dishes from the dining room, her small phone buzzed in her apron. A strange number. She stepped aside and answered. The woman on the line was warm, excited. "Is this Ayobi? Congratulations. You've won our National Essay Prize. We'd love for you to come to the station and read your piece live. Can you be here Friday?" Adora's knees went weak. She barely whispered a thank you before ending the call. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to happen. That night, she stood by the kitchen door, nervously rehearsing what she would say. Eventually, she summoned the courage to approach Mrs. Adelin in the sitting room, where she lounged with a glass of wine. "Ma, I won a writing competition. They asked me to come speak at the station on Friday." Mrs. Adelin's perfectly arched brow rose. You wrote something worth awarding." She laughed, dry and cruel. "Don't go there embarrassing this family with your grammar and that thick village accent. If you do, don't bother coming back here. Do you understand?" Adora nodded, lips pressed tight. The sting hit hard, but deeper than the insult was the familiar pain of being reminded that her worth had limits. In their eyes, she retreated to the staff quarters, tears blurring her vision. Uncle Mike found her there, seated outside her room, clutching the crumpled essay email on her phone. "I heard," he said softly. She looked up. "They'll never see you," he continued. "But that doesn't matter. This," he tapped her phone, "this is your door. Kick it open." On Friday morning, Adora dressed in her best, a clean pressed blouse and a long skirt, her hair neatly tied back. She borrowed Uncle Mike's ironed sandals. He drove her to the station, quietly humming high-life music to calm her nerves. When she stepped into the bright lights of the studio and stood before the microphone, her hands trembled. But as she began to read her essay, something shifted. Her voice, though accented, was steady, clear, true. She spoke about the overlooked, the mocked, the unheard, and in that moment, Adora was not a maid. She was a voice the world could finally hear. The studio lights were hot, the air tense with silence as Adora stepped up to the mic. Her knees trembled beneath the hem of her skirt. The paper in her hands rustled, betraying the shaking. She opened her mouth, and at first the words stumbled. Her accent, heavy with her homeland's cadence, turned the room uneasy. A few quiet laughs rippled from the back. She faltered. Her heart thudded in her chest like a warning drum. Then she caught sight of one young woman in the front row, eyes wide and warm, listening, really listening. Adora closed her eyes for half a second, took a breath, and began again. They say I sound wrong, like I borrowed English but never paid the full price. Her voice still wavered, but the words found their footing. We laugh at the sound of voices we don't understand, she continued, forgetting that wisdom can speak from any tongue. The laughter died. The room went still. Every syllable after that landed like quiet thunder. She spoke of silence, of being unseen, of how many stories go unheard because they are wrapped in the wrong accent, the wrong clothes, the wrong face. Her voice carried the ache of years tucked away beneath service trays and sharp whispers. When she finished, the applause began slowly, then swelled. Someone was already filming by nightfall. The video was all over social media. A stranger had uploaded it with the caption, "This voice, this truth. Her name is Adora." The voice they ignored. It caught fire. Thousands retweeted, then millions. Some posted clips of her speech. Others dug deeper, posting screenshots and whispers. "She's a maid in Ikoyi." They laughed at her accent. "Look who's laughing now." #Adara Speaks began trending by midnight. Back in the mansion, Marcy was on her bed scrolling when the video popped up on her feed. Her fingers froze. Her jaw dropped as she watched Adora's face on screen, framed in confidence and honesty. The same girl she'd mocked. The same voice she'd filmed just to get a laugh. Quietly, Marcy opened her memories. She deleted the video. Downstairs, Mrs. Adelin saw the footage too, and her reaction was not awe, but fury. "She used our name," she hissed, pacing the room. "Now they'll think we abused her. We took her in, and this is how she repays us." Mr. Adelin, sharpered and sharper-tongued, added coldly, "This is political suicide. We're hosting a donor next week, and now the world thinks our maid is a prophet." When Adora returned from the radio station, her steps light despite her exhaustion, she was met not with congratulations, but confrontation. Mr. Adelin stood at the center of the sitting room, arms crossed like a judge. Mrs. Adelin flanked him, lips pressed tight with disdain. "Did we give you permission to use our name?" she snapped. "Do you think because people clapped you're suddenly important?" "I never used your name," Adora replied, calm but resolute. "All I did was speak, for the first time, and people listened." Mr. Adelin's voice sharpened. "You brought disgrace to this house. Pack your things. You're done here. No argument, no appeal." The verdict was final. Adora stood still for a moment, shoulders trembling, not from fear, but from the quiet heartbreak of being cast out for daring to rise. Then she turned, walked to the servant quarters, and began to pack. Uncle Mike was waiting outside her door, already holding a nylon bag. His eyes glistened. "You spoke well," he said. "I saw it, heard it, everyone did." From his pocket, he pulled out a worn envelope. "You thought I didn't notice," he smiled gently. "You've been stashing away, little by little. I kept it safe for you." Adora looked at the envelope, her own handwriting scrawled in tiny corners. Her meager savings, her future. As they reached the gate, Uncle Mike stopped her. His voice cracked as he whispered, "This is not the end. This is the first line of your next chapter." Adora looked back once, not with longing, but with finality. She had spent years in that house, silent in service, but tonight her voice had cracked the walls. Now she would write the rest of her story, and this time the whole world would hear it. 6 months later, under the cool skies of Geneva, Switzerland, a woman in a tailored Ankara dress stepped onto a grand stage, flanked by rows of international flags. Cameras clicked, journalists murmured. Her stride was calm, her chin lifted with quiet confidence. The MC's voice echoed through the auditorium, crisp and formal. Please welcome journalist and youth advocate, Miss Adaora Obi, representing Nigeria. Applause followed, warm, curious. The woman reached the podium, adjusted the mic slightly, and looked out over the crowd. The room fell into anticipatory hush. She began her speech, titled Broken English, whole voice, with a steady tone. Her accent was still present, still proudly Igbo, but there was no trace of apology. In it, she spoke of how she was silenced, ridiculed, overlooked, all because she didn't speak the so-called right way. She told of how language became a cage until she turned it into a microphone. They laughed when I said bottle, she said, but it turns out you don't need perfect pronunciation to pour truth into a room. As she spoke, she unraveled a narrative that many in the room had never heard before, about classism hidden in everyday conversation, about the invisible line between proper and poor, and how a society loses its soul when it mocks the voices of its most honest children. My accent carried my ancestors, she declared in her final lines. It carried struggle, rhythm, and truth. I don't need to change it. The world just needed to listen. Thunderous applause followed. Some stood. Cameras zoomed in on her, steady face, catching both the fire and the grace in her expression. Back in Lagos, the Adelani family sat in their pristine living room, the TV casting a soft glow over their silence. Marcy sat motionless, eyes fixed on the screen as Adaora spoke. The same girl she once mocked, now being honored by global leaders. Mrs. Adelan reached for the remote but didn't press a button. Mr. Adelan, for once, had nothing to say there. Silence was its own kind of reckoning. Online, Adaora's speech ignited conversation and celebration. Hashtags resurfaced and multiplied. Hashtag ADAORAOBI. Hashtag Broken English, whole voice. Hashtag Our Voice Too. Nigerian influencers, activists, and everyday citizens reposted the video with pride. She trended across platforms for days. Old interviews were reshared. Someone posted the original video from the radio station. Others shared clips of her speech from Geneva, translated in multiple languages. Soon, a prominent local NGO reached out, offering her a book deal, a memoir centered on identity, voice, and resilience. A media group offered her a podcast series. You will write, the publisher said, and you will speak as yourself. Adaora accepted, not because she wanted revenge or recognition, but because somewhere in a mansion in Lagos, a girl just like her was being told to shut up and shrink. She wanted that girl to hear a different voice echoing through the noise, a voice that once sat in silence, but now sang across nations. Adaora returned to Nigeria to the hum of applause and rising admiration, not with bitterness, but with purpose. She stepped onto home soil with a different kind of confidence, no longer quiet, no longer shrinking. Within months, she launched the Voices Heard initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and literacy support for domestic workers, street children, and orphans who, like her younger self, had been told their voices didn't matter. She partnered with NGOs, visited rural schools, and hosted workshops in cities and villages alike. Every time she spoke, whether in fluent English or her native Igbo, she did so without flinching, bold, grounded, free. Her first televised interview on Arise TV went viral. Wearing a simple dress made by a local designer, she sat with her back straight, her words clear, her tone unapologetic. For years, she said to the host, I thought being heard meant sounding like everyone else, but I realized being heard means daring to speak as you are. Viewers across the country sat up. Teachers played her speech in classrooms. Young girls copied her name into their journals. Housemaids whispered her story to one another during breaks. One weekend, Uncle Mike paid her a visit at her modest but bright office in Rilla. He stepped inside, wearing his old cap and smile. Adora hugged him tightly. They sat with mugs of tea and laughed over old memories. How she used to hide newspapers under her mattress. How he once caught her practicing radio intros in front of a mirror. You did it, Ada, he said quietly. You turned all that silence into thunder. Her eyes welled. She squeezed his hand. Later that week, she packaged the first printed copy of her memoir, The Voice They Never Heard, and sent it to the Adelanus. The cover was simple, a silhouette of a girl standing before a microphone, her braids blowing like flames. Inside the front page, she had handwritten a short message in clean, neat script. To the family that taught me silence, thank you. I found my voice in a brightly lit university dorm room in the UK. Marcia Dellen opened the parcel. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the note. She turned the book over, unsure of how to feel. For the first time in years, she typed a name into Instagram and followed her. No comment, no like, just a quiet click. She opened the message box, typed a few words. I'm sorry for, then paused. Her thumb hovered over send. She stared at the screen. Then slowly, she erased. The message, she wasn't ready. Not yet. But something inside her had shifted. A twinge of shame, perhaps, or longing, or the first flicker of accountability. Adora never knew about the follow. She was too busy walking into another classroom, placing another book in a young girl's hand, saying again, your voice matters, just as it is. In a modest classroom nestled within a rural village, the afternoon sun filtered through cracked windows, casting warm light across a group of wide-eyed teenage girls seated on worn wooden benches. Adora stood at the front, her presence calm yet radiant, her voice steady and full of conviction. She shared her journey from being mocked for her accent as a housemaid to standing on international stages as a journalist and advocate. The girls listened, leaning in with a mix of awe and hunger, soaking in every word. Then, from the back, a slender girl with tightly braided hair raised her hand timidly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But, what if people laugh at my voice? Adora paused, her gaze softening. She stepped away from the blackboard and walked slowly toward the girl. Instead of answering from a distance, she knelt beside her, eye to eye. Let them laugh, she said gently, her words carrying weight. Beyond their simplicity, then speak anyway. Speak until they listen. The girl blinked, her lips parting slightly in a quiet gasp, not of fear, but of recognition. The others watched, something unspoken stirring in the room, courage beginning to bloom. Adora stood and looked around the classroom, her voice rising just enough to reach the corners of the room. Your voice is not the problem, she said, firmly, her eyes sweeping over the faces in front of her. Their ears just aren't ready yet. And with that, the girls sat a little taller, their silence no longer submission, but the hush before their own storms.